Mm-hmm. My favorite part. It's like a bell.
Ready? Ready?
We good? Okay. I'm calling to order the Independent Ethics Review Task Force this Wednesday, August 21st at 6 p.m. Do we have anyone signed up for public comment?
We do not have anyone signed up.
All right, great. The next item would be the review and consideration of an action on the minutes of the July 24th, 2024 meeting. Were there any changes or modifications to those minutes? There are no updates required. May I have a motion to approve? Motion second. All in favor of approving the minutes? Aye. And it's approved. The next item is our workshop on the revisions of the Code of Ethical Conduct. And as y'all can see, we had really thorough research background provided for us regarding everything, but the procedures as well. I did want to ask probably a dumb question or show my ignorance, but I know because I was going through to review our comments to make sure we've checked off all of the sections other than what was indicated. And later on, we look at the in one of our subsections for today to discuss, we discuss like something that pertains to an official. And I went to the definition and it says a member of city council, administrative board, or advisory board. This might be a dumb question, but is the mayor considered part of city council?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, I just wanted to confirm that because that title wasn't called out, so I wanted to, that was just one preliminary item. Okay, thank you for that. So the first section, 2-80, council member prohibited doing business with the city. We found no revisions, and I'm just confirming that. And then on, I didn't have a comment on here on 2-84. Just wanted to clarify, it was model code. I don't recall, there's no revisions, and I didn't have it marked in my notes as something that we've reviewed. Do you have any notes to that effect, or does anybody? Not trying to throw around. I just want to make sure when we get to, we're in our last two sections and that we're covering our basis. It is a very short section and it follows the model code, so we might have flown through it. And looking at it, I didn't have any recommended revisions. I
didn't either.
okay, great. Okay. For my own review, I wanted to make sure we checked off. Okay, so that leads us off, if I'm not mistaken, with the campaign activity before we get to the complaint procedures. So were there, after reviewing, or have we had a chance to review the sample regulations for campaign activity for some of our other cities across the state? Were there any comments or recommendations regarding campaign activity?
Things that they caught up.
Mhm.
This really did reference to campaigns that could be for conflict of interest. So was there another time where that came up?
There's a different section for conflicts of interest. This is specifically with respect, and Meredith, feel free to interject, but with respect to contributions, filings, if I'm not mistaken.
The division for in addition to. The number. So
Yes.
are we going back to that and discussing camping activities in the division?
I was taking the section as a whole, but yes, we can review the additional added. We do have the campaign finance reports, because that was the thing that, so we added the line item, had some questions around amounts. And then we do have now the further analysis for contribution totals. So currently in here is listed $2,500. There was recommendation previously about making it 1,000. Where did we land? Based on the new information provided, it looks like highest contribution was 62, average contribution was 4,300, and that was what is the word? Normalized. So we removed some of those outliers, and or not we, for us, was kindly removed by Clarence. Thank you. And so average contribution was 4,385.
So what is mode?
The number that comes up most often.
Most frequent.
Oh,
Amount.
median mode.
But if you ask about standard deviation, you lose me. Mhm.
The most often and not. There won't campaign contribution.
Correct.
26
So
reports had $0.
they have to, right, they're required to report regularly, even if it's 0. So that's why it came up with such a disparity.
They serve 3-year terms, so they're not actively campaigning for those 3 years, so there will be time periods where they're not spending money or receiving money. But they are still required to report periodically during that time.
It's reasonable.
I think that's what we landed on.
Yeah, that's a figure we kind of said.
I'm comfortable with that number. Okay, well, let's confirm that and add that to the. And even though I highlighted and flagged it in red, I still just flew right through it. Okay. So, but that also actually transitions very nicely into campaign activity. Were there comments or suggestions regarding that section? It very heavily, or is in alignment, not very heavily, it's in alignment with election code. So, you know, obviously want to be mindful with respect to what's within the section.
We're okay with the 10% provision.
Can you call it the section, do you mind?
Oh, page 19 and 153. It would be like not the first 2 sentences, but the first full paragraph that you see.
Yes, 10%. It is unlawful for any person who is an adverse party in any pending litigation against the city or who has ownership of 10% or more in any entity that is an adverse party to the city in pending litigation. I'm comfortable with that. I don't have any knowledge or background as far as I would assume that's in alignment with in the election code.
Actually, this paragraph 3 is City of Sugar Land initiated.
Okay.
That is not in the election code. Everything else is. Their cities have something similar, but the dollar amounts were fairly from the last task force.
Okay.
My question is 10% or more or any? When you get down to the last part of that paragraph. It says candidate unwillingly accepts a contribution of the foregoing provision, there is a duty to give that, right? Oh, it is a duty of any candidate to refuse to accept any contribution that may be offered to a quiet person who is known to the candidate to have a litigation interest. So we're coming back to the 10%. 10% or more, if we're okay with that, I'm fine with it. I'm just questioning, is that our marker?
So I guess any is person and entity is
10%.
10%. I don't have a fundamental issue with that.
Just because we're reviewing it,
Mhm.
want to fill that out.
No, absolutely. Are there any other comments or thoughts around that particular section?
I don't have a comment.
I just asked that if it was pulled from the sugar one, that 10% rule, where did that 10% come?
It was a number by the last task force. And this is a sugar land provision, it's not state law.
Do you remember?
Probably, I mean, I know at some point there was another point where it talks about, talk about 10% ownership, and it was probably just parroted from that.
And I don't recall what other cities have, so I'm gonna sift for just a second. For
Is there an
comparative.
obligation that they report? So if someone were to offer something that violated the clause, are the people who are covered by it, are they obligated to, okay, hey, I just want to let you know such and such company or this person, so that we can be aware, or your office can be aware that that company needs to be informed that they can't do that or kept an eye on?
There is no mandatory reporting requirement. Litigation, whenever we have litigation filed against the city, they get a report monthly to council members. But it's not in enough detail, but there's no obligation for the council member to come back and say, hey, I've received a donation from so. Unless they were to say, so-and-so gave me a donation, are they suing us? I wouldn't know unless I reviewed the campaign report.
10% of X can be a pretty big number. I mean, why not put it to 0?
Ownership?
Yeah, I mean,
Or what I hear you're suggesting is if you have any kind of affiliation with an entity that has adverse litigation.
correct.
So as like a 0 tolerance.
That would make sense.
I mean, the El Paso has very similar, says the ownership interest of 10% or more. So I'm wondering if that came from somewhere.
And so have the same question, because I have City of Houston and they're 10% and 50,000.
Yeah.
So I mean, it's like,
Perhaps that is.
that's where it came from.
Yeah.
I don't have a recollection of any discussion of percentage.
10%
Yeah.
ownership. So yeah, it seems like it's.
Not just.
But for Steve's point, should we consider any amount of ownership?
I would be
From
against that.
a conflict standpoint.
Because honestly, if you're talking about like entity versus individual, if you're not allowed to accept it from an individual whatsoever.
Why the leeway?
I'm inclined to agree.
And the fact that Houston and other cities say it's 10% makes me want to always be better than them. So I would agree with your point, just to not be equal to someplace that we always want to strive to be. The shining star
Has this come up? And within the last,
ever.
Hypothetically, yes. We did have a situation where we were being sued and one of the council members had a different type of relationship with that company. And there was a concern that they might attempt to buy a settlement. And that was one of the reasons why this was brought up
Hmm.
in the last task force. The details were not shared with the task force at the time. Hypothetical, because it did not actually happen.
but that also, I mean, I feel like that also tips the scale into. I'm not, the percentage. Doesn't matter to me, you know, from an ethics standpoint, I feel like it's either like. Right or not.
I mean, the whole idea.
I mean, a lot of it's gray, but that to me feels kind of,
The idea of the document is that we eliminate as much gray. And there's yes and no, pass, fail.
And even 1% of a huge corporation could be a.
1% X could be a big number. Well,
Yeah.
you know, any percent of. You know,
it's true.
that's why zero tolerance is the best path.
I'm with you.
I think it removes some of the gray.
Mhm.
And some of the like potential burden of proof too, right? Like, well, I only own, or the, you know, it's. Any or none.
Would that cover? So sometimes somebody may have stock in a company, ownership. And while they're in office, somebody else handles all their investments. If we have it at 0, it would cover a situation where,
Well, it's not a contribution,
right, but
like to your campaign. And then the stock ownership.
so,
falls on
but
the-
if I own,
Ownership is not the person in office, it's the person who is suing the city.
okay,
Does that help?
yes,
The intent was to try to prevent somebody from buying a settlement or to influence the council member because it takes a vote to settle. Under a certain dollar amount. The city manager and the city attorney have the authority to settle up to 25,000, which is why the line is there, and everything above that goes to city council.
it's. If I own stock in a company, I own part of that company.
Through stocks,
Hmm,
yeah, through stocks.
Right, I mean,
You got it, you
if
got
I
it.
own 1 share of Exxon,
You got an
it's
interest.
not worth a whole lot, but it's still part ownership. Is it?
But is Exxon suing the city, or are you suing it for a different reason?
If it was Exxon,
If it was Exxon suing the city and you wanted to, in your capacity as a shareholder, what standing would you have in that lawsuit?
certainly not gonna be enough money that's gonna affect the stock price. Right?
Well, but either way, it would be like Exxon contributing to your campaign. And they're not, in this around contribution? So I mean, it would be like that's what we're talking about is. For Exxon, if they were in pending litigation against the city, to contribute to Andrew's city council campaign.
Correct.
And so it would preclude them from doing that, no matter whether he owns one stock or 1%.
It would preclude Andrew from making the contribution because he owns 1%. It doesn't pertain to any percentage of stock that the council member has.
So then Andrew couldn't contribute to my campaign.
It doesn't matter.
If
he has
Andrew
stock
is
in
Exxon, I'm getting
If
confused.
Andrew owns stock in Exxon and Exxon is suing the city. This would be Andrew can't contribute. Your contribution.
And who is Andrew?
Just a citizen.
Stockholder.
Somebody who wants to contribute to me.
Okay,
But then, I mean, that would like the presumption of awareness too, right?
You get too small a percentage.
Well,
so it's more indirect then.
It's still
So-
ownership. I mean, if you, that,
I mean, I just wanna.
Cause I thought-
I mean, if you,
There's ownership where, you know, it's a restaurant and I own half the restaurant with a partner versus ownership and like I have one share of Green Bay Packers. Technically own part of that. I only have a seat. That shouldn't necessarily preclude me from,
that could
Donating.
very real, that could absolutely happen. So I mean, think about like publicly traded like Waste Management, right? So perhaps hypothetically, if they had a contractor, they were not awarded the contract, and so they sue the city because of unfair RFP practices. And then I own Waste Management stock, and I'm very in support of Andrew's campaign for city council, and I want to contribute. I'm precluded from doing so. If you say, if you take out the percentage.
is there a way to phrase ownership of real property versus ownership of stock? Because is there somewhere where we can separate the concept of?
With that creating a huge gray area.
Okay.
I mean,
I
you
have
could
to
put
read this a few more times. I thought this was about a company that could be suing the city. And that company being disallowed from being able to contribute to any candidate's campaign. So a more direct conflict of
Mhm.
interest. As opposed to Joe Blow, you.
XYZ construction.
Let me do a
Yeah.
hypothetical.
Yeah.
So just last week, we finished our tow truck rotation. And so you have to apply for that, you go through a background check, and then you qualify, and then they put all the names in a bucket, a hat, whatever, and they electronically pull out 10 names. And there's obviously a lot more than 10 people who applied, so if you're not one of those 10 people, every 2 years, they look at it and try to find some flaw in the process to get back on the list to kick somebody else out. So we have found, looking at the tow truck applications, if you go to the Texas Secretary of State, they're not usually 100% owned, they're 50% owned, they're 25, 25, 50, so there's partial ownerships in there. So they, like a low dollar value lawsuit, let's say 30,000 will be a tow truck company. And somebody who owns 15, 20% of that tow truck company may want to go up to a council member and say, hey, you know, if I give you $5,000, when you go in that back room, can you help my settlement? And so that's like a hypothetical situation of what may have been under consideration when this sort of thing came up.
And I think that's a very different scenario than
I don't think the intent
if
is,
somebody owns
Still a
stock in a
vulnerability,
company.
though. Yeah,
Still a vulnerability.
I think our hypothetical is closer to what the facts would be. It'd be a smaller type lawsuit. As opposed to a great big lawsuit where your $5,000 contribution is not gonna be nearly enough for us to settle in $1 million.
Mhm.
So the intent was to get the smaller, low hanging fruit. Where you might actually know that person or have a better belief of influence.
And then if a lawsuit goes over
One stop.
$25,000, it changes how it's handled anyway.
Right, if the lawsuit's less than $25,000, council doesn't determine whether or not to settle. The city manager, the city attorney do that. Or our insurance carrier does that.
That's not a huge number. Even if somebody did own shares.
Zero,
Sure.
just stay in bed.
Sell your stock, make your campaign contribution, buy your stock back, you comply.
At a pretty big profit.
And you're gonna give up your commission, it's gonna be more than you could possibly offer a city council member to do something.
I'm kind of, you know, with y'all on 0 versus 10%, like there doesn't need to be the 10%.
I have no problem with zero. You gotta be better than Houston, so even 9%.
you know. Fundamentally, I don't have any issues with zero. The stock thing does pose its own challenges, but I think we also could have an interpretation of what ownership interest might be in and of itself. So I feel like there's ambiguity already as it's written. So I just think who is,
Who has any
Yeah.
ownership?
mhm,
I think that does leave Joe Blow vulnerable, who has all right intentions, but has a retirement plan and has somewhere in his funds.
I mean, I own companies I don't even know, or not
Right,
own, but like,
yeah,
like
some partial.
components, right?
Mhm.
Stock or,
But they didn't knowingly, right? Isn't it? Unknowingly accepts a contribution.
Well, that's a recipient.
Well, and we're at the end, it says, when the candidate finds out, they have to return the contribution. Maybe, yeah, they may not know. It says it's the duty of the candidate to return the contribution within 10 calendar days after the candidate becomes aware of litigation. They have to become aware of it.
Should it be more unlawful for the person to, on, like the fault would be on the person, who has an ownership interest compared to the candidate? Like,
How would you enforce that?
Yeah.
it just seems like we're coming down on Joe Blow as opposed to the candidate who could potentially accept the contribution.
I don't know, but I've mentally solved the stock problem. So. If you change the verbiage and say any pending litigation against the city or owns an entity that is that adverse party to the city in pending litigation, like typically you don't, I mean, stock ownership is ownership, but you wouldn't typically say, I own this entity. Do you know what I'm saying? Like
Mhm.
an owner of an entity?
Right.
I don't know.
And I think it takes care of itself. Like who is known to the candidate. I mean, the wording is there, known to the candidate. So it would have to be obvious. So that 10% there doesn't make any sense. Either you know it or you don't.
Well, and I'm a little bit okay coming down on the Joe Blow side, like of the entity owner, because they are in pending litigation with the city, right?
Mhm.
So I mean. Fair or unfair, right? But I mean, they're actively pursuing litigation. So.
And that's not a passive activity.
Certainly in that case,
It's a
Yeah.
choice.
Is it realistic to think that somebody who's giving a campaign contribution because they want something isn't gonna make it known that they have a relationship with whoever's filing the suit? I'm not gonna give you $5,000 and go, hey, because I love you, here's $5,000. More likely, I'm gonna say, hey, here's $5,000. My uncle's construction company has got a beef with the city, see what you can do. At that point, the candidate then becomes aware of the connection, and I have to give the money back. Or not accept it. There'd be no benefit to somebody giving a campaign contribution. Trying to buy a favor and not asking for what
For
that
the favor.
favor is.
sure.
I don't know, there's some truth in that, but I've definitely seen circumstances that happen in the back end, right? So it's like, oh, like, I'm happy to contribute, and then like, they make it into office, and it's like, oh, by the way,
Remember
if you
what
could check into this pending litigation situation, that would be great. So that it does happen on the backside too.
But then the onus is not on the campaign or the candidate. So to refuse that, at that point, it doesn't apply here,
So it wasn't known.
correct?
Or they could refund it 10 days ago, being
Being
told
notified.
and file corrected filing.
So either we're. In your example, it was a year or two later. And then they're asking for the favor. Okay, now you found out about it, give the money back. It's not gonna happen.
Yeah, I'd be amazed if they could.
We're not that big a city.
Two out and see
Right.
what you could. I'd be impressed.
It's not pushing.
Some diligent planning.
Yes.
But I think it sounds like we're in alignment with the ownership component. And we'd like to make that proposed change.
To clarify, you want 0, correct?
Yeah, just
Or can you just say, or who
who
has
who
any,
owns an
who
entity.
has any ownership and interest and just
Can we get rid of the
any-
word interest and just say ownership?
any, yeah, so. Delete interest of 10% or more
Correct.
in any
So I
ownership.
think if you remove the word interest too, then that's like stop. I feel like the stop part gets a little like less raised. It becomes a different interpretation in my
Yes.
mind. Is it? I don't know, but
It's there now.
it sounds different, yeah.
It does now.
It is today.
Any other things to highlight or discuss around campaign activity? No. All right, great. So I believe we're on our last section. Complaint procedures, and I would ideally like to take them as a whole. I mean, that's how like the examples were pulled and how I kind of went through it, so. I did have a couple of questions to start off for discussion. This one's minor and it could be splitting hairs, but in 297 where it says, when it's outlining what you have to include in the complaint. So this is like, hey, I'm a resident of Sugar Land. I see something bad that's going on. I need to bring it to this board's attention. I'm putting this complaint together. I'm like, okay, let me go reference what I'm supposed to do. And I know that goes back to the website, you know, what we list. In my mind, and I know this is like regulatory and kind of like legalese styling, but it says the specific provision of this article that is alleged to have been violated. Would it make sense to say like the specific section of the code of ethics or whatever the specific. The reference the title of the document, the article itself. I just feel like it'd be clearer for like a complainant.
Yeah.
If I'm like this article, what part of this article, you know, like I feel like if you're not used to reading documents like this, you might get confused.
Yes. That's a good point.
And then I don't know that we need this, but I wanted to ask Meredith because of your office facilitates the complaints, meaning like receives. City secretary's office receives it, gets it over to you, but anyways, logistic wise, y'all are involved, so I wanted to make sure that you do not need email. So we have home address, phone number. Do you need an email address to be added in there, or is that not necessary, not a preferred method of communication? I don't have any strong feelings. It was more like a logistics question of,
Just be an added point of contact.
Sure, the only ones we've had so far have been submitted by email. The purpose of this is so that we have an ability to go back and find the person. We can add emails if we do.
just a logistical suggestion.
I have a question.
Yes.
On the previous page, 296. The last sentence, complaints may be filed against officials who no longer hold office. I'm thinking of enforcement. If they're already out of office. What do you
It
know,
can be fine, and then there's a letter of like admonition and something published in the paper. Sanctions, so notification, letter of admonition, a reprimand and a letter of censure, and the letter of censure is published to the paper, if I recall that correctly.
Yes, part of the reason that's there is because there is a prohibition on employment afterwards and a prohibition on sharing confidential information. And depending on the time when the person finds out, we don't want to elected or appointed officials in the last 2 months of their term doing really stupid things and knowing that they have a free pass in 2 months and a day.
Got it.
And if they decided to run for office at a future point, it would let
Everybody.
citizens know.
Yeah,
Oh, that's true too, because right, this is for like boards and commissions, right? So I could be serving on a board and planning for my run and doing some things in advance of my run that may be unethical and in violation of this.
And it may take longer than 2 months to
To
find out.
uncover it.
Yes.
Mhm, absolutely.
Kristen, in 297 E. Suggestion on. Violation, I put a parentheses around the S and violations.
Hmm.
That's, I know it's grammatical, but. That's my opinion, yeah.
I think that makes sense. Um, And I don't know. If it does it matter whether we call it a violation or an allegation?
Or both.
Mhm. I feel like we should pick one and be consistent. Now you sent me down a grammar path.
Alleged violation.
yeah, it had to be alleged by him.
Oops, sorry, y'all.
Well, the first sentence says alleged violation.
Violation, yeah. So then maybe an F, we change the allegation to alleged violation.
Yeah, alleged violation.
And then add your parentheses around the S. Consistency. Oh, any other questions on 297?
Do we want to add anything on in F about recordings or videos? I'm just thinking of that recent alleged violation.
Documents or media? Or is media too like, document, video, recording?
Documentation,
Yeah,
then
maybe,
it could-
yeah, documentation,
Mhm.
and that,
and that would be more umbrella. Documentation or descriptions.
Are they not allowed to do that? I mean, I thought.
Like if it's maybe like it's a snippet, so the complaint we had was a video online.
The video from.
So somebody would have saved it down and sent it.
Or a voicemail.
Okay.
Text message.
we had talked in the other room. At one point about. Who can file? Like, do they have to be a resident of Sugar Land? Because they're the affected people versus anybody can.
Resident or person who owns a business?
I was gonna say the
I think-
business, or a business that deals with the city too, right? So like you don't have to be, the business doesn't have to be within
Right.
Sugar Land, but it could be attempting to do business with the city, observe something in city council that was in violation and file a complaint. Yeah.
Should they, I think we talked about, should they have to have some interest in the city versus somebody in Denver,
Oh, I remember this.
goes,
Yeah,
"Oh, I heard about this, I'm gonna file a complaint." It's like, well, you don't pay taxes in Sugar Land, you don't do business with Sugar Land.
But they own a strip mall in Sugar Land.
Well, then they do, I was saying, they would be, right? The discussion came up when we were talking about. Careless. Things.
Well, but if they violate the code, you know, we live in a digital world, they violate the code.
So the discussion was who gets to file the complaint? Did they need to have some connection to the city? Versus just anybody. To file a complaint? Would that reduce further stuff? We did have this discussion.
Mhm.
Okay. I don't remember the full outcome,
No, I'm debating it in my head. so.
but
Kind of leaning on the side of leaving it open.
Yeah.
I think that's what we decided.
I'm
Because
go ahead.
So I was just gonna say, at the point of the complaint being filed and we reviewing the complaint, we can still determine it's frivolous at that point. We don't have to hear it.
That's right, that would be our
But it
fault.
could come from multiple sources where resident doesn't live here, but they could make an observation, or business could make an observation.
From an ethics standpoint, if something wrong has occurred, does it matter who observed it?
Yeah.
In that vein, like, I feel like, you know, see something, say something, I could be traveling, passing through and happen upon some sort of gross negligence of the code of ethical, but I mean, in all seriousness, if you see something and it's wrong, you know. If we had seen some sort of a huge influx of, you know, weaponization of this board or this process or something to that effect. I probably could be swayed in some way possibly, but I feel like leaving it open allows us to be a city of very high ethical standards, where if somebody sees something occurring that's wrong in violation of this, that they're able to report it.
That's where I'm at.
Me too.
I think that's where we go in more before, I just,
It's a fair question. And discussion.
because we were discussing, is there a way to limit frivolous stuff?
Because ultimately, it still comes back to the ethics board. So I think once it reaches back to the ethics board, then it's back in debate.
And also, if there comes a day that it becomes some sort of activity that needs revisions, it's also still a living document,
Sure.
so.
And you're still the gatekeeper.
Like I'm gonna continue to say, if it's signed, sworn, dated within that year and
Yeah.
it alleges the person it's
Right.
filed against is
Yeah.
covered by it and the violation is here, I'm sending it to you all. It's not my judgment to determine what the morals of the city is. That's what y'all need to do. All I have to do is be the minimum gatekeeper saying these minimum qualifications have been met. You all are the ones that are responsible for saying, yes, this is what the current temperature of the city is. You determine if it's frivolous.
I would leave it Lincoln.
Then we're not worried about transparency.
Mhm.
We're the ethics board, we're in place to encourage transparency
Hmm.
and sharing, so we'd want to keep it open.
Anything else in 297? I did have a question for your office and the city secretary's office for 298. It's because we've had a couple of complaints come through and actually go through the process. It's kind of a broader question, but with respect to the procedures, have there been any logistical challenges in this process facilitating it from your office's side that might warrant amending or updating the procedures? So anything throughout, because we don't have full visibility into the the background of it, right? So however many days it took, or we had to move things along or postpone, or I'm just wanting to pick your brain from a facilitation standpoint. Is there anything that's absent in the procedures or difficult to adhere to even from a logistical standpoint?
Wasn't there that one concern about the notary, that people might not have access to a notary,
Yes.
and that could be a barrier?
And on the website where they have the electronic filing, I believe you put a footnote that they could bring it in because the city secretary's office and the receptionist and all them can notarize it for us.
And you can also do online electronic notarization. So you don't necessarily, you don't have to go see the person and get the stamp.
Right.
There's a
The
method.
bigger hurdle for us was trying to get it to you all and schedule within your
Yeah, it's
schedule
still like
within that
those-
tight
That
time
10
frame.
minute, I mean, that
10
10 day,
That was more of the issue for us, is getting outside counsel and a quorum of you all within such short notice. But we also have to balance that with the interest of speedy justice. We don't want this hanging out there forever.
if stuff shows up November, December, all the holidays and people taking
Vacation.
vacations at the end of the year.
Why you have two alternates, but we did struggle to get.
And that's, I wrote that because were there challenges with the timelines? Not that I want to drag it on, but also, you know, realistically, getting everybody to the table.
The biggest challenge for deadlines was getting a quorum of this and posting, for the open meetings act. We were able to internally, because we could just email it across the hall or walk it across the hall. So we had much faster turnaround on our time period. It was the more so trying to work with your
One with the
schedules.
outside counsel as well.
Yes, that was a challenge.
That, and if the complainant or defendant, it's the end of the year and they're gonna be on vacation the week that we have to meet. It's kind of unfair to make them like, yeah, okay, you complained,
Well, they-
you were aware that when you filed the complaint,
But
10
they
day
can
window.
consent to an extension of time.
Okay,
I don't know that we are in the position to say, well, it's holidays, we're gonna extend this. I think that's more so the person who filed the complaint is more in the driver's seat. Or an extension.
and.
And it may be that, no, we're gonna do this right now.
Is there a reason we can't change that 10 days to 15 or 20 or? I mean, there's nothing that says we have to stick to that 10 days.
No, this was what the task force had recommended as far as trying, once we start putting all the days together. From, as soon as city secretary gives it to me, usually the same day they get it or the next day. Unless we're having meetings scheduled and they don't want to stress me out for the next day, they give me a day break.
Or there's a hurricane and you guys are busy picking up
So
leaves.
the offices. But then I have 7 business days to make this determination and send it to you all. And then we have 10 days from the date that it's sent to you to have a meeting scheduled. So that's 17 days, 17 business days. But based on work schedule, trial schedule, sometimes I can't get that done within the first day or two. It takes me the full 7 days.
And if you're on vacation for a week, is there somebody in your office that can make the determination if it comes to us?
Absolutely there is,
Okay.
but I'm not gonna sit here and mislead you. We do use some of those 7 days to check outside counsel's calendars before we notify you. Because we don't wanna say, are you available these days and not have outside counsel? So we are spending part of those 7 days shopping to see if our 2 people are available, what dates, so that when we poll you. Within that window frame, we say, okay, these are the dates we have an attorney available for you. So there are situations where it may take us the full 7 days to write an opinion and have counsel available. And you may get it on day 7 just because we are needing the full time for the logistics of that.
Is it reasonable to make it 20 or 30 days so that you have time to take care of it and ethics folks have time to look at their schedules and work things out? Is that too long?
I was gonna suggest 30 days.
Okay.
For somebody that's being accused of something, you don't want to stretch the time out too long. I mean, I agree with the 30 days would be great, but what if I'm the complainer or the complainant and 30 days is a lifetime?
And that person's continuing to serve on the board. So depending on how strongly you feel, if you're willing to file a complaint. You're looking for very quick justice. You don't want that person to continue
Yeah.
to do the work.
I mean, I get what everybody's saying as far as schedules and all, but
It's
two
alternates,
seven-
two
alternates.
17 days, start to
Okay.
finish,
uh,
if we use every day possible. It could be a challenge, but I think, you know, some challenges are worth it as long as you are
Okay,
providing the justice that's needed.
and we haven't come to a point where we weren't able to do it,
yeah.
so.
And you said the complainant has an opportunity to change the,
From the first complaint that was filed due to scheduling obligations on their side, we were able to push it past that 10 days because they were not available at any date within those 10 days. So I believe the first one you heard 3 or 4 weeks after it came through. By the
Okay.
time we had a first available date, the complainant was available. So I'm comfortable allowing them to postpone because they're the one with the charges alleged against them. I'm not very comfortable with the city going, you know, this isn't convenient for me, let's push it out. Because arguably, as a city attorney and the city secretary or city clerk, we work for you all. And so it looks like we are giving you preferential treatment. I would rather err on the side that the resident or the complainant is getting the preferential treatment as opposed to the elected or appointed official. Which is why we also use outside counsel. We want to get away from any perceived conflict of interest. But if we get in a situation where I absolutely cannot get a quorum, it is what it is. I tell that person, I'm sorry,
Yeah,
it's
you know-
day 13. This is the absolute best I can do. You can't file a complaint on me. This is the best I can do. But I need a quorum to hold this. But
I think we
hopefully,
uphold the standard, and if it becomes a problem, that we can revisit, but I'm erring on the side of upholding the standard.
it only takes 4 of y'all to make a quorum and there are 9 of you, including your 2 alternates.
okay,
So even if we have a panel of just 4,
So we're good.
I would prefer to leave it with this time frame. It gets tight, but in the
Okay.
interest of, and, you know, and the fairness of the person who's being
Mhm.
accused.
We don't want to be add to the bureaucracy that government is known for.
Mhm.
but the complainant can then
sympathize.
drag it out.
Yeah.
And so if the complaint's filed against me and I want it
Oh, I'm
dealt
sorry.
with immediately.
The complainant is not dragging it out. It's the person who's
Okay.
accused.
Okay.
If you file a complaint and you can't show up, that's why we ask for all the documentation,
Mhm.
because that is what you can use.
Okay,
And if they file it
If
and they've
it's
got it,
insufficient and they're unavailable, then
Then it gets dismissed.
okay.
but I think.
Because if the
that's-
complainant can push it, then they could
No.
drag it out for
that-
50 days and
that's
now
not gonna
I'm
be-
sitting there accused. Okay.
I'm not comfortable with that. I wouldn't be comfortable allowing anybody other than the person who is the accused having the extension as they need, if they needed outside counsel, if they had other things. Because that wasn't
Right.
something they
I
planned
agree.
happened to them.
Right.
Whereas the complainant knew when they filed it. And
Mhm.
could have asked questions as far as the process ahead of time. And staff were always here.
Yeah.
I appreciate the question.
what else? What other? Um. Comments, suggestions, observations?
With 297,
Uh,
298.
298 is where I'm at. But if we're, I mean, we're ready to move,
I didn't have anything else.
I don't have anything for 298.
I didn't either. 299?
I have one small one.
Okay.
Since we were talking about the number of days, section D, last sentence. 5, we've gone to calendar days. Do you want to switch back to business day?
Thank you.
Well, then E's calendar,
So what?
I'm sorry.
E's calendar as well.
Yeah, I think
Yes.
I think it should be business days.
Business days.
Yeah.
in the logistics, if Ruth Ethics wants to talk to the person, the accused about settling it, what's that? It still comes to us? Or is that something that they're offered when your office gets involved?
So last fall, you all sat down in one of your meetings and you came up with the format to go on the website to file a complaint. And you also came up with a, hey, guess what? A complaint's been filed against you. What do you do? Letter that goes out. So when the complaint is sent to you, we send you in that same notice, these are the things you can do. And in there, it talks about how you can do the settlement. And so it would typically be better to go through your first hearing, which is within the 10 days. It says, yes or no, we're gonna move forward. And then if you say, yes, I want to move forward, that person can say, hey, look, it's worth my time. Let's talk about it.
Okay.
Or they could say, no. But from start to finish, it's not a 10-day, 17-day, because you have your, yes, I call them, the gatekeeper, but your go or no go meeting. And then we have 10 days,
Right.
5 days, 10 days, and it starts going from there. So it could be a multiple month type situation. But it's within 17 days from the date it's filed maximum that they find out go or no go.
Okay, so the initiation of, I made a mistake, I want to settle it. Or you can say, will come from the accused. Nobody's from ethics. Or your office says, hey, just letting you know. Like, when they get the letter, they see that option at that point. They're the only ones that can start the summary process.
Yes, because at that point, the city secretary's office just becomes the courier. And my office becomes the one that says, okay, outside counsel, here's the date of the hearing, here's the procedures, send me your bill. That elected official or appointed official can't come to me and ask me questions. I can't give them advice. At that point, they're on their own. My office is conflicted out. And we can't say, yeah, boy, this looks bad for you. You better go apologize. We're not gonna do that. We can't do that. I would caution you all from going to the ex parte and saying, hey, look, this looks bad for you.
Yeah.
I'll catch you a deal if you say, I'm sorry, give me a Jolly Rancher. So.
Oh, sure. And if the accused needs outside counsel, that city, your mayor or city council, who covers the cost of their counsel to defend themselves?
They do. It's not fair for taxpayers. That if their behavior is in violation, then they need to be
Yeah.
corrected. If it's frivolous and it's so obviously frivolous, they probably don't need to pay for outside counsel, can handle it themselves because it is so off the wall. It's just unfortunately, I guess, the cost of participating and being a volunteer or an elected official.
And once you recuse yourself and you can answer any questions for them, your job is just to defend the city, right? I mean, at all points, the city attorney's office job, your only client is the city.
Our only client legally is the city, but if there's an adverse situation between us and another board, say we don't like how ZBA ruled on something, we have 5 days to appeal that, then we would have outside counsel doing that because we can't represent both of our clients. But in this situation, once the elected or appointed official has a complaint against them, they're still my client. I can't represent them or the city, so I can't represent you all during this process either, because you are my client, but that person's also my client. Does that help?
It does, because if I'm on city council and I'm accused of something, part of me running for something, everyone's accepting that I may have to defend myself at my own expense.
Everybody who's been on council has been on council since these have been adopted.
Mhm.
And they receive training and copy.
That's what I was going to say. That's also
Yeah.
why we all receive annual training on the code of ethics, so that we can be informed as to what's within it and we can conduct ourselves accordingly.
it's a price they pay.
Oh, I just want to make sure.
I mean, it could be
They
literally,
understand that
You walk
when you
around
want to be mayor, oh, right,
and be
but
responsible.
they understand, you want to be mayor. There's pros and there's cons, and one of the cons could be you get accused of something or you do something wrong. It's your own nickel to straighten it out.
Good, congratulations, that's the same with you.
Right, yeah.
You're also covered under this policy.
Sure.
No surprises.
So it's 7 o'clock. Are we able to move forward and keep going time wise, or do we need to cut it off and halt?
I need to cut it off, but
Same here.
Yeah.
Okay, no problem.
solve that one.
So we, I just.
Is there?
Document it in my head, 299 is where we're leaving off, sorry, I'm just drawing the line so I know where we're at.
So
Krista-
we're still.
No, I don't, I mean. Let me ask that, did anyone else, did we complete the discussion on 299?
Yes.
Okay, so we're.
I didn't have anything.
To 100.
To 100.
Okay. And were
And
there
even though-
others that you wanted to flag for our attention that we can focus on?
Okay, sure, yes.
Okay.
Thank you for asking. One thing that I observed in a couple things that I observed in other cities, and not saying we need it, but something to look at those sections to consider whether or not it would be beneficial. We do not have an appeals process or anything around that. That could be intentional and that could be fine, but I noticed many other cities had some sort of an appeals process. To my knowledge of what I've seen, ex parte language for the procedures, I don't know that I observed that in there. Okay, so the ex parte language, you might want to look at, that could be a benefit. And I called it, when I wrote in my notes, compulsion, but duty to cooperate. I don't know that I saw that in ours. Those are three things that I very consistently saw throughout other procedures that are not in ours. Again, not saying like we need to include that, but it might be something to look at and see if it has any kind of merit when going through that. Those were kind of the three remaining things we hit. My other, also regarding the issuance of the name clearing proceedings. Regarding the timeline, later than the 90th day. First learn of the allegations, well, there's the prospect of. If the investigation or the hearings go longer, anyways. But. Those are just a few things, but those three sections I'd look at within some of those other cities that we had.
Brings us,
And thanks to Anjali for all the research, because that was, we had a plethora of comparatives, so that's helpful.
Thank you.
we're gonna look at Missouri City in there. It has a retaliation clause. That might be something we want to add for both sides.
Interesting.
Is on page 95 of 153.
So we have our homework. No, we're at the end. We've made it to the end, and perhaps if we're able, we can look at the website information in our next packet. So we can keep this packet with the cities that we have. We don't need any additional research, in my opinion. But perhaps we do include a printout of those two documents we discussed today. Okay, any other comments, questions, scheduling? We do have, we're losing Chris if we continue on Wednesdays. So she has a conflict moving forward.
I can make it pretty much any day. Meredith, I think.
What type of city?
City business. If we lose one person, and that's the only,
Ashley, you wanna come up? I'm trying to think of
if we
what
can reschedule it.
what days the room's gonna be available. Tuesdays are a no-go. We either have city council or P and Z. Thursday. We have P and Z Parks. Is that the third?
Yes.
So
that week as well.
The
We're
ninth,
looking at the week of the ninth.
second Tuesday, fourth Thursday. So the fourth Thursday is Parks and P and Z. If we were to move to a different day of the week, trying to think when this room is available. And when we have attorneys that could do both meetings if we overlap. And when you have staff that's available.
Yes, okay.
Do we lose Chris permanently then? Like, did she say she can not make any Wednesdays?
Does board membership impact this task force?
Yes,
And when is the
attendance,
attendance?
3 in a row and you're off.
Sorry, that is not what I'm asking.
Okay,
When does Andrew roll off?
Next September.
Next September. Oh, so not this September.
no, he was reappointed.
Okay. I was making sure that if we're
Oh,
rolling
I'm sorry.
off
Yes.
in the middle of this exercise, if we're
No,
losing anybody.
uh, Everybody's on until at least October 1st, but
Okay,
they'll be
that's
held
sorry.
over until I am satisfied with the people we interview. So you serve at my will.
A pleasure.
So
Okay.
we would lose Chris
So
for the
we'll let
remainder
go.
of the task force.
If it's on a Wednesday, yes.
Correct, but we probably only have one. Maybe two of these, so we're not gonna lose her on the board.
No, I'm just
Just
saying
this
that
meeting.
she cannot meet for the task
Okay.
force on Wednesdays any longer. We have a quorum, and if we're all able
Yeah.
to do on a Wednesday, I'm comfortable with that.
I can. So I can, so
I'm fine with Wednesday.
that would be the 11th. 3 weeks from now.
I had it on the 4th. But
Oh, you said we had one on the.
Oh, it's pre-scheduled on the 4th.
yeah,
That's in 2 weeks.
Mhm.
I'm hoping
Are you available the 11th?
I will be available.
Is this room available the 11th?
Yes.
11th would actually be better.
I mean, 11th is better because it's not right after Labor Day.
Right.
Yeah, I've got the block on the 4th.
Do we think we have availability?
I'm good on the 11th.
I'm good.
make it.
I'm probably out, but it's okay.
Let's try for the 11th.
Just in case anybody missed the
Oh,
award.
yes. Yeah, turn it the other way so they can read it.
That's pretty cool.
So, you know, I want it to be official, but everybody out there in television,
Congratulations.
everyone in television land can see. You're welcome.
So we're scheduled for next time. We have
Okay,
where we
moving it
left
from the
off.
4th to the 11th.
Section 100. We have 4 sections that we can look at for our comparable cities. Any other business comments? May I have a motion to adjourn?
I'll second.
Second, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Meeting adjourned.
Thank you.